If you look at a list of the largest retailers in the United States today, you see, the usual Titans, Walmart, Amazon, Costco.
Hmm.
The scale of these companies is so immense that they feel permanent, like geological features of the economy.
Right. You feel like they've always been there and always will be.
Exactly. But if you rewind the clock just 2 decades, the landscape looked, well, significantly different, and there is one specific mountain on that map that has completely eroded away.
And I mean, completely. It's a disappearance that I think a lot of people still haven't fully processed.
Yeah.
We aren't talking about a niche boutique or some flash-in-the-pan fad. We are talking about a company that, based on 2005 revenue, was the 83rd largest retailer in the entire United States.
That is the stat that just blew my mind when we started researching this, the 83rd largest.
Yeah.
That puts it ahead of companies that are still household names today. We are, of course, talking about Mervyn's.
Mervyn's. For anyone who grew up in the West or Southwest between, say, the 1970s and the 2000s, that name triggers a very specific set of memories.
Oh, absolutely. The brown and rust-colored signage.
The back-to-school rushes, the sheer ubiquity of the place. At its peak, Mervyn's operated 189 stores across 10 states. It was a multi-billion-dollar heavy hitter.
And yet, in the span of roughly 4 years, it went from being a cornerstone of the Target Corporation's portfolio to complete liquidation.
It's one of the most rapid and, I would say, controversial collapses in retail history.
It really is, and that's why we are doing this deep dive today. This isn't just a nostalgia trip.
Although there will be some of that.
Oh, for sure. We'll definitely talk about the specific vibe of a Mervyn store, but this is a forensic accounting of how a retail giant dies.
It's a story about the changing psychology of the American middle class, the brutal realities of real estate valuation versus retail operations, and, the very sharp edge of private equity engineering.
We have a massive stack of documents here. Court filings from the bankruptcy, internal memos on corporate culture, architectural histories of suburban sprawl, and financial analyses of the 2008 crash. Our mission is to trace the arc of this company from its very humble, almost accidental beginnings in 1949 through its aggressive and somewhat confused expansion under Target, and finally to dissect the mechanics of its downfall.
And we have to be clear about that mission, because the ending is complex. Mervyn's didn't just fail because people stopped buying pants.
No.
It failed because the ground beneath the stores became more valuable than the stores themselves.
That distinction, the business versus the building, that is going to be so crucial later on.
It's everything.
But let's start at the beginning, because before Mervyn's was a pawn in a private equity game, it was just a guy named Mervyn.
Mervyn G. Morris, born in 1920, passed away fairly recently in 2021.
Wow.
He was a quintessential mid-century entrepreneur, and the founding of the store is tied entirely to a specific date in a specific place, July 29th, 1949, in San Lorenzo, California.
I want to pause on San Lorenzo for a moment because the context here is everything. In 1949, San Lorenzo wasn't just a town. It was. It was a phenomenon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
San Lorenzo Village was one of the nation's first planned communities, very similar to Levadtown in New York.
Right.
It was located between Hayward and San Leandro. And these weren't custom-built estates, they were tract homes.
Thousands of them.
2- and 3-bedroom houses, built rapidly between 1944 and the 1950s to house workers from the nearby shipyards and, of course, the returning GIs.
So we are literally talking about the birth of the baby boom.
That's the demographic.
Young families, first-time homeowners, people who had just survived the Great Depression and World War II. They had optimism, they had growing families, but they did not have unlimited budgets.
Right. They were incredibly price sensitive. They needed to outfit these new homes and clothe their kids. They weren't going to drive up to San Francisco to shop at the high-end department stores like I. Magnin or Emporium.
Because those places were priced for, what, the established elite, not the young mechanic with a mortgage.
Exactly. So Mervyn Morris sees this gap. He knows he can't compete on luxury, so he competes on price. But his initial strategy wasn't just cheap goods. It was a very specific arbitrage model that I think is fascinating.
The factory seconds.
The factory seconds. This is a term we've largely lost in modern retail because supply chains have become so precise. But in 1949, manufacturing was, well, it's a bit more variable. A factory second was a garment or a textile that had a flaw.
But we aren't talking about giant holes or missing sleeves, right? This isn't junk.
No, and that was the genius of Morris's eye. He hunted for grade B merchandise where the flaws were, as the company history puts it, minor and undetectable by most.
So, like, what kind of flaw are we talking about?
Maybe the stitching on the inside hem was a millimeter off? Or maybe the dye lot for a batch of towels was 2% lighter than the standard.
So technically it's flawed, but functionally it's perfect.
Precisely. And because of that technical flaw, the manufacturers couldn't sell it to the premium department stores at full price. Morse would swoop in, buy these lots for pennies on the dollar.
And sell them to the families in San Lorenzo at a massive discount compared to the perfect versions sold in the city.
It's a value proposition that perfectly matched the psychology of his customer. These were people who wanted quality. They wanted the brand names, but they were pragmatic.
If a towel dries you off just as well, who cares if the blue is a slightly different shade of blue?
Exactly right. It allowed Mervyn's to carve out a niche that was totally distinct from the luxury stores and distinct from, the five and dime variety stores. It was the smart shopper niche.
Now, before we move past the founding, we have to address the name. Mervyn Morris, M-E-R-V-I-N. But the sign on the building said M-E-R-V-Y-N-S.
This is one of my favorite details because it shows just how arbitrary branding can be.
It's amazing.
Morris was all set to call it Mervyn's with an I. It makes sense. It's his name. But he was working with a graphic designer on the original storefront signage.
And the designer intervenes.
The designer looked at the sketch and basically said, the I is too thin. It doesn't anchor the word. A Y has a tail. It occupies more space. It looks more visually appealing and balanced.
Get out of here. So he changed the spelling of his company solely because a graphic designer thought the letter Y looked cooler.
That's it. That's the whole story. And that decision stuck for 60 years.
Wow.
It's a testament to the fact that sometimes aesthetics drives strategy from day one.
So the store in San Lorenzo is a hit. It resonates with the tract home generation. But Morris didn't sit still.
No, the model worked, so he decided to scale it. The first big leap happened in 1962. Mervyn's opened its second store, and this was a really strategic shift.
Where did they go?
They moved about 15 miles south to Fremont, California, into the Fremont Hub Shopping Center.
And this is where they transitioned from a local shop to a real chain.
Yes, and notice the terminology change. In San Lorenzo, they were a standalone entity. In Fremont, they were an anchor tenant.
Which means they were the main draw. They were the reason people went to the hub.
Correct. And with this move, that factory seconds model, it began to fade. You just can't sustain a chain of large department stores solely on hunting for manufacturing errors.
You need consistent inventory.
You do. So they evolved into a general, lower-priced alternative to the national chains. They kept the value pricing, but they started carrying standard merchandise.
And this evolution from quirky discounter to department store powerhouse caught the eye of the big fish.
Oh, yeah. By 1978, Mervyn's had over 50 stores in 3 states. And that's when Dayton-Hudson comes knocking.
Dayton-Hudson, which we now know as Target Corporation.
Right. This acquisition in 1978 is pivotal. Usually when a conglomerate buys a chain, they absorb it, they change the sign out front, and integrate it into the board.
But they didn't do that with Mervyn's.
No. Mervyn's was so successful, and its brand loyalty was so strong in the West, that Dayton-Hudson kept it as a separate subsidiary. It had its own headquarters in Hayward, its own buying teams, its own culture.
Speaking of culture, I want to dig into something that kept coming up in the listener forums and the employee archives we looked at. The credit goal.
Ah, yes. If you talk to anyone who worked at Mervyn's from the 80s through the 2000s, they will mention the credit cards.
It seems like it was more than just a metric. It was like a way of life.
It was the engine of their profitability. You have to understand that retail margins on clothes are thin.
Razor thins.
But the interest rates on store credit cards, that is pure profit. And Mervyn's was incredibly aggressive about this.
I was looking at the employee handbooks. This wasn't just for the sales floor managers or something.
No, it was everyone. If you were a cashier, you had a quota. If you were stocking shelves but helped a customer, you had a quota.
What was the quota?
The expectation was that a part-time employee would generate 1 credit application for every 8 hours worked. Full-time leadership had even stricter goals.
That creates a really high-pressure environment. I can just imagine the friction at the register.
Oh, absolutely.
You just want to buy a pair of socks, and the cashier's pleading with you to open an account because their job depends on it.
It does create friction, but it also creates a massive database. Mervyn's knew exactly who was buying what, when, and how often. That data allowed them to tailor their inventory and their marketing, especially those Sunday circulars that arrived in the newspaper, with incredible precision.
So fueled by Dayton-Hudson's deep pockets and this aggressive credit strategy, Mervyn's enters its empire phase.
The 1980s and 90s saw them pushing hard beyond the West Coast.
This is where we see the ambition, but also maybe the cracks in the foundation.
I think so. They moved into Arizona, Colorado, Texas, Michigan, Minnesota, and then they try to conquer the South.
The Atlanta and Miami campaigns.
This is a classic case study in retail hubris. In the late 80s and early 90s, Mervyn's decided they could just parachute into markets like Atlanta and Miami and replicate their California success.
But they didn't just build new stores, they took over existing real estate, right?
Right. And this is where the mismatch happened. In Miami, for instance, they took over 5 locations that had previously been Lord & Taylor stores.
Lord & Taylor, that is a very, very different vibe from Mervyn's.
It's night and day.
Lord & Taylor's upscale, East Coast, aspirational. Mervyn's is sensible.
Exactly. Imagine the customer psychology. You're used to walking into that building and seeing high-end fashion, perfume counters, a certain quiet luxury.
Mm-hmm.
Then Mervyn's moves in. They keep the shell of the building, but fill it with mid-range basics and aggressive signage about smart saving.
It's a total culture clash. The
Ugh.
building is promising one thing, and the merchandise is delivering something completely different.
It confused the customer. And frankly, the California cool vibe didn't translate well to the specific cultural nuances of the Deep South or the Miami metro area.
So the sales just weren't there.
Mervyn's invested heavily, millions of dollars, but the sales per square foot never materialized. And the retreat was pretty swift. By 1997, they pulled out of both Atlanta and Miami completely. They sold 10 of the Florida stores to Dillard's. It was a humiliating pullback.
So it proved that Mervyn's was a regional power, but perhaps not a national one.
I think that's fair to say.
Mm.
So they retreat to their stronghold, the West, the Southwest, parts of the Midwest. But even there, they started feeling the heat. By the mid-90s, the retail landscape is changing.
You have Kohl's rising up, you have Target itself becoming Tarzay, making cheap look chic.
And Mervyn's was stuck in the middle.
The dreaded middle. Not the cheapest, not the coolest, not the most luxurious, just there.
So in 1995, they attempt a massive rebrand to find an identity.
Mervyn's California.
They legally changed the name, they updated the signage, they wanted to bottle the sunshine and optimism of the West Coast and sell it to the rest of the country.
And they hired the ultimate Californian to sell it. Joe Montana.
You couldn't pick a better avatar for 1990s California excellence than the 49ers quarterback.
Right.
They put him in everything. TV spots, catalogs, billboards. The message was, Mervyn's isn't just a store, it's a lifestyle.
But did it work? I mean, specifically, did it work in places that weren't California?
The data says no. In fact, it kind of backfired.
Really? How?
The records show that store managers in Texas, places like Lubbock, Midland, Odessa, were baffled by this. Texans have a very strong state identity. They did not want to shop at Mervyn's, California.
I can absolutely see that. Putting California on the sign in West Texas is basically inviting people to drive past you.
It was a fundamental misunderstanding of their customer base in those regions. The rebrand had little to no effect on revenue. And by 2001, the California suffix was quietly dropped.
Just gone.
They went back to just Mervyn's.
So we enter the 2000s. The rebrand failed. The expansion to the South failed. But the store is still massive. It's still generating billions.
Absolutely.
However, the corporate parent, Target, is looking at its portfolio and making some hard choices.
This is the beginning of the end, though nobody knew it at the time. In March 2004, Target Corporation announced it was putting Mervyn's and the legendary Marshall Field's chain up for sale.
Target wanted to be pure Target.
They wanted to shed the baggage. Target's own growth was exploding, and Mervyn's was seen as a drag on their margins. But selling Mervyn's was tricky because of what we mentioned earlier.
The real estate.
The real estate. Mervyn's owned a lot of its own buildings. It wasn't just leasing space in malls. It held the deeds.
And in 2004, the real estate market was.
It was heating up big time. So potential buyers looked at Mervyn's and didn't see a retailer. They saw a portfolio of land assets that happened to sell shirts.
But Target actually tried to do the right thing here, didn't they, initially?
They did. The sources indicate that Target refused to sell to liquidation groups that just wanted to shut it down immediately to sell the land.
They wanted to protect the 30,000 employees.
They wanted a buyer who would commit to running the retail operation. But there were sharks circling. We have to talk about what happened in Minnesota with the May Department Stores Company. This was a prelude to the chaos.
What happened there?
This was a brutal strategic maneuver. In June 2004, as part of the Marshall Field's deal, the May Company also bought 9 Mervyn's locations in the Twin Cities area.
Okay, so did they open them as May stores?
No. They bought them and immediately closed them.
Wow, just to kill the competition.
Exactly. Analysts at the time saw it as a defensive blocking move. They didn't want a competitor taking those spots, so they bought them and shuttered them. It showed that the store part of Mervyn's was becoming secondary to the location part.
So enter the private equity consortium. July 2004, Target finds a buyer.
A group, Sun Capital Partners, Cerberus Capital Management, and Lubert Adler Management.
These are heavy hitters in the world of distressed assets and private equity.
The biggest.
Now, we need to slow down here and explain exactly what these firms did, because on the surface, they bought a retail company. But in reality, they performed a very specific type of financial engineering that is, let's call it controversial.
It's the OpCo-PropCo split. This is critical to understanding why Mervyn's died.
Okay, break that down for us. OpCo and PropCo.
Okay. So traditionally, Mervyn's was one company. It sold clothes, that's operations, and it owned buildings. That's property.
Right, simple enough.
When the private equity group took over, they effectively sliced the company in two. They created a property company, or PropCo, to hold the valuable real estate assets.
And an operating company, OpCo, to run the store.
Exactly. So far, that just sounds like paperwork.
Yeah.
But it becomes predatory through a sale-leaseback mechanism. The new owners, the private equity firms, essentially had the PropCo charge the OpCo rent.
So Mervyn's, the store, suddenly had to pay rent on buildings it used to own.
Yes. And not just token rent. The allegations in the later lawsuits claimed that the rent was set at market rates or higher. But here is the kicker.
Okay.
The private equity firms used the future stream of those rent payments to secure the loans they used to buy the company in the first place.
Wait, let me get this straight. They bought the company using debt and then forced the company to pay the rent that would then pay off that debt.
That's exactly it. It's a leveraged buyout where the target company pays for its own acquisition. Mervyn's, the retail operation, was suddenly saddled with massive new expenses, rent, without any change in its revenue. They were bleeding cash to pay their own landlords, who happened to be their owners.
It's like selling your kidneys and then renting them back from the guy who bought them.
That's a vivid way to put it, but yes. It stripped the company of its most valuable safety net, its real estate, and massively increased its monthly costs.
So under this new structure, the clock starts ticking. The new owners bring in Rick Leto as president in 2005 to try and turn the retail side around. But the financial headwinds are enormous.
And their solution to the cash crunch was to shrink. In September 2005, just a year after the takeover, they announced 62 store closures.
62? That's a huge percentage of the fleet.
It was a bloodbath. They pulled out of 28 locations in Texas alone. They wiped out 15 stores in Michigan. They retreated from Oklahoma.
And the rationale was that these stores were underperforming, right?
They claimed these stores represented only 17% of sales, but were a drag on profitability.
Right.
But if you look at it through the lens of the PropCo split, you have to wonder, were they closing them because the stores were bad or because the real estate was worth more if they sold it off?
That's the enviable real estate portfolio line we saw in the document.
Exactly. The investors knew that even if they couldn't sell jeans, they could sell the dirt under the store.
So 2005 is a disaster. 2006 and 2007 see more contraction.
They leave Oregon and Washington completely. They close the last Colorado store. The footprint is just getting smaller and smaller.
And then the perfect storm hits, 2008, the Great Recession.
Mervyn's was already fragile because of the financial engineering. Now the consumer economy just collapses.
It was a death spiral.
It was. By July 2008, the situation was critical. On July 21, reports surfaced that Mervyn's had stopped updating its financial status to its lenders.
That's the corporate equivalent of going radio silent.
And the market reacted immediately. Vendors, the companies that make the jeans, the shoes, the frying pans, they stopped shipping.
And consider the timing. July. This is the lead up to back to school.
The second most important season in retail. If you don't have inventory in August, you are dead. Mervyn's shelves started to look bare. Lenders denied requests for working capital. They were suffocating.
And this is where Mervyn's, the company, does something extraordinary. They sue their owners.
This is so rare, and it highlights just how contentious this buyout was. In September 2008, the debtor, Mervyn's, filed a lawsuit against the private equity firms. Cerberus, Sun Capital, all of them.
We need to be specific about what they allege. They didn't just say you did a bad job.
No, they alleged fraudulent transfer. The lawsuit claimed that the 2004 deal had stripped the retailer of its real estate assets, leaving it insolvent.
So they were essentially saying, you set us up to fail so you could loot the real estate.
That was the core of the argument. They claim the structure was designed to benefit the shareholders at the expense of the company's long-term viability. Now, the private equity firms denied this, of course. They argued they tried to save the company and that the recession was the real culprit.
But the fact that the lawsuit was filed at all shows the level of internal toxicity.
Oh, absolutely. And while the lawyers were fighting, the stores were dying. On July 29, 2008, Mervyn's filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Chapter 11 is usually an attempt to reorganize.
Right. You hold off the creditors, you restructure the debt, you try to emerge as a leaner company. Mervyn's vowed to keep stores open.
But the reality on the ground was chaotic. I read about the grand openings that happened during this time.
It's just tragic. There were 3 stores that had held their grand openings just a few months prior to the bankruptcy filing. Imagine hiring staff, training them, cutting the ribbon, and then telling them 90 days later that the company's insolvent. It shows a complete disconnect between the operational plans and the financial reality.
So they're in Chapter 11. They close 26 more stores. They pull out of Idaho. They exit San Antonio. They're desperately trying to find a buyer to save the remaining core.
And there was a glimmer of hope. Forever 21.
Right. Forever 21 was on a rocket ship ride at this point. They were expanding massively.
They were. And they made a bid. They offered to purchase 149 of the remaining Mervyn store.
That would have saved thousands of jobs. It would have kept the storefronts active, even if the name changed.
It would have. But the negotiations fell apart. The details are sealed in the bankruptcy dealings, but usually these things fail over price or over the rejection of certain leases. Forever 21 walked away.
And that was the final nail.
On October 17, 2008, the bankruptcy court converted the case from Chapter 11 to Chapter 7.
And for listeners who aren't bankruptcy lawyers, the difference between 11 and 7 is, it's the difference between the hospital and the morgue.
That's a good way to put it. Chapter 7 is liquidation. It means the entity is effectively dead. The goal is no longer to save the company. It is to sell off every stapler, every mannequin, and every light fixture to pay back the creditors.
The going out of business signs went up.
And by the holiday season of 2008, Mervyn's was gone.
The aftermath was a feeding frenzy for the surviving retailers.
Kohl's and Forever 21 eventually came back to the table, but not to buy the company, just to pick the carcass.
Right.
They won a joint bid to take over the leases of 46 stores. Kohl's took 31. Forever 21 took 15.
It's interesting that Kohl's took so many. In a lot of ways, Kohl's is the spiritual successor to Mervyn's. The store layout, the pricing, the racetrack, aisle design, it feels very similar.
It does. Kohl's effectively absorbed that middle-class mom demographic that Mervyn's abandoned.
So the stores are converted or demolished. The headquarters in Hayward is knocked down, but the name, Mervyn's, it didn't completely vanish.
This brings us to the zombie phase of our deep dive.
First, the physical ghosts. If you drive around California today, you can still find Mervyn's on the map.
Literally on the map. There is a Mervyn's Drive in Fullerton, California.
What's on Mervyn's Drive now?
A floor and decor. But the street sign remains. It's a municipal tombstone.
And there's a Mervyn's Place in Bakersfield and a Mervyn's Way in San Jose.
These streets were named when Mervyn's was the anchor that developed the area. The anchor is gone, but the city infrastructure remembers.
But the brand itself, the intellectual property, had a stranger journey. In 2009, the Morse family stepped back in.
Jeff Morris, the son of the founder Mervyn Morris, bought the rights to the Mervyn's name and the customer list out of bankruptcy.
There is something poetic about that. The son buying back the father's name from the ruins.
It is poetic. And his intention was to relaunch it. He wanted to bring Mervyn's back as an internet-based enterprise.
But for a long time, nothing happened.
Years. There was a website that just said, coming soon, or ask for an email address. It just seemed like the project had stalled.
But if you go to mervyns.com right now, in 2024, it is active.
It is, but it's not the Mervyns you remember. You won't find the High Sierra brand shirts or the specific private labels they used to carry.
What is it then?
It's essentially a closeout retailer. They sell overstock merchandise from other brands. It's an online discount bin wearing the skin of Mervyn's.
A zombie brand.
Exactly. It leverages the trust and nostalgia people have for the name to sell goods that have no actual connection to the original company's lineage.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. We started with a guy in 1949 looking for crooked stitches and shirts to sell to GIs. We ended with a private equity collapse and a website selling leftovers. What is the big takeaway here?
I think the Mervyn's story is the perfect illustration of the financialization of the American economy.
How so?
In the beginning, the value of Mervyn's was its ability to serve its customers. It made money because it sold good stuff at good prices.
Right.
But by the end, the value of Mervyn's wasn't its relationship with the customer. It was its real estate portfolio and its capacity to hold debt.
The product became secondary to the financial engineering.
Exactly. The company was consumed by the very capital markets that were supposed to support it. And when the recession hit, it had no resilience left because it had been hollowed out from the inside.
It's a cautionary tale.
Hmm.
Just because a company is huge, 83rd largest in the country, doesn't mean it's safe. If the land is worth more than the business is living on borrowed time.
And in the case of Mervyn's, that time ran out in 2008.
Well, next time I drive past a Kohl's that looks suspiciously like a Mervyn's, or I see that street sign in Fullerton, I'm going to think about the I that became a Y and the empire that just disappeared.
It's a landscape full of ghosts if you know where to look.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's a complex story, but one that explains so much about how our retail world got to where it is today. We'll catch you on the next one.